This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Oh, man. What was it that I said at the end of last show? Expect the unexpected. What potential surprises await us in 2023? Seeing how 2022 went when it came to wrestling news. And here we are, several days into 2023, the new year. And as of, I guess it would have been 2 days ago at this point, guess who's back, pal? Oh boy. Not even attempting to sneak in the back door undetected from prying eyes. Nah, dude, Vince took his foot, lunged into that door with great force, and came barreling through like a madman. The old classic BMF walk or whatever it was. Wow. You know, the problem is that as I'm sitting here recording this at the moment, I pretty much know as much about this as the people reporting on it know. Answer being not a whole lot. It's like everything that went down in that whole investigation late last year where we all sat back and twiddled our thumbs for ages, waiting for something groundbreaking to occur. And then by the end of it, they kind of haphazardly end the investigation and life proceeds as normal. There are obviously a whole lot of questions that I think we all have. For example, probably the biggest one being, what does it all mean for the future of WWE television? And I think by now, the answer seems to be pretty straightforward, at least for what we know now. I'm not going to bore you to death with the details because you can just go read about it in the articles if you so please. But basically, if we're to buy the idea that Vince is purely back as a member of the board and he's purely there to negotiate deals for a potential sale of the company, then I think it's pretty safe to say that as of now, until proven differently, I don't think the actual WWE programming should concern a whole lot of people. Trust me, I know it's easy to sit here and start chomping at our nails, wondering how long it'll take before we see Alexa Bliss barfing black tar again or Bray Wyatt being set on fire in the middle of the ring. Although now that I think about it for a minute, you know, they are booking that blackout match at the Rumble with him and LA Knight. How fitting would it be if Uncle Howdy turned out to be Vince? What an epic return that would be. It was a Vince setup all along. All the Bray vignettes, the Uncle Howdy skits, the terrible Halloween crap they were filming on SmackDown, attacking and tying up LA Knight in the back somewhere and beating him up every single week on SmackDown. It was all a ruse to set up Vince's return. It was punishment for them doing away with the former LA Knight character, whatever his name was. I can't even remember it at this point. Talk about long-term storytelling, right? But in all seriousness, I think for the current situation, with the reports that have come out already, Vince coming back into the fold as a board member to strictly talk sales, I don't think that's something that's going to directly affect the on-screen product at the moment. And trust me, when we get to the SmackDown report later, you'll see. I don't think Vince's input could do that show much further damage at this point, even if he did come back into a creative position. I think the discussion more so should be focused on, A, why in the hell Vince waited until now to just reinsert himself as a member of the board if apparently this was something he could just do without receiving any repercussions for it? That's a big eyebrow raiser right there. Or B, who he'd even be considering selling the company to at the moment. Are there actually major TV network or media companies that would even want to purchase the WWE given its current state? I mean, I know the go-to answer for a lot of people for the better part of a decade now has been Disney. Trust me when I tell you, Disney doesn't want to buy WWE. Or vice versa. I don't think WWE would even want to sell to Disney. Those organizations work together like oil and water, dude. And if Vince truly is a smart businessman, he'll take one look at Disney's stock and realize how crappily that company's been run into the ground. He'll say, why on God's green earth would I want to sell to that idiot CEO, Bob Iger, or whatever his name is, when he clearly has no idea how to run his own damn business? Trust me, Vince didn't get to where he is today by being reckless and stupid with his money. If he's going to sell, he's going to linger on those negotiations for as long as he can. More than likely, he probably already knows who he's going to sell to. Probably why he's rushing to get back in there to start making conversations about it. I mean, it's been in the works forever now, and you know Vince is going to be looking into the 10 digits before he puts that pen to paper. This ain't going to be like Vince buying WCW for $3 million or whatever it was. Basically fucking pocket change. Again, you can all mock Vince for his political opinions, but there's usually a reason why conservative businessmen are the ones that people are most threatened by. They know what they're doing, they're fiscally responsible, and they're not willing to negotiate with just anybody. For Vince, I can almost guarantee you probably somewhere in the 80 to 85th percentile that whoever Vince is currently talking to right now, he either knows already who he's potentially going to sell that company to and he's just buying his time, or he's strongly considering one party and waiting to hear about a backup option in case something falls through. But Disney, NBC, Amazon, I mean, those companies are managed and run by some of the dumbest fucking people you'll ever meet. You think a guy like Vince is thinking about actually selling to those gutless pricks? Give me a break. It is a crazy time, though. For me, I'm just rubbing my hands together, waiting for this ensuing train wreck to come to a bitter end. I got back into watching WWE because of the fact that Vince was finally ousted from any creative positions, and while the shows have still mostly stunk a wet anus, it is still more preferable than watching Braun Strowman get drowned in a lake or, as noted earlier, seeing Alexa Bliss barf out black tar on TV. And that's just merely scratching the surface of all the other inconceivable garbage that's gone down in the last few years alone. So if Vince winds up back in any kind of creative power or television role, I don't know, dude. You might see those Mid-South TV reports kick in on my end. It's been in my back pocket for a while now. I can tolerate SmackDown being bad, but the thought of Vince overseeing anything creatively for another 12 months, I don't even think I have that much patience. So we'll definitely see how this all develops. For sure, though, you have to think that if there is going to be a sale, this would be the year for it to happen, right? I mean, Vince basically forcing his way right back into power at the beginning of the year. I mean, he's obviously been stewing on something while he was absent from the company. So if there was ever a time or a place for all this to be sorted out or come to any kind of closure, 2023 would be the year. Now we just wait and see which enterprise Vince decides he wants to sell to. Could be Fox, could be NBC, could be the Saudis for all we know. Because we all know WWE has that weird relationship with the Saudi government. It's not totally out of the realm of discussion either. Quite frankly, I'd put more stock in the Saudis running WWE more effectively than I would any American business. It wouldn't take all that long for Disney to start pushing for woke ideology and fucking LGBTQ, LMNOP, ADHD rainbow agendas. Telling WWE to start promoting chemical castration for young kids. And on their show, they had a purple-haired feminist talking about how much of a misogynist Vince is. Because that's captivating programming, folks. And trust me, you think I'm kidding. There's a reason I don't watch cable television anymore. It's wrestling, and that's about it. And most of the time I DVR that shit anyway because I don't even want to see the garbage that precedes or follows wrestling programming. Bunch of crap. I should have just moved off the grid to live in the woods or something. But then I couldn't do this podcast, and y'all couldn't hear me bitch and complain about how bad wrestling is. So, you got to sacrifice something, right? But, yeah, I guess we'll see how that all turns out. Speaking of WWE content, though, this is the WWE/WWF influenced program here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We've got Retro Raw and the most recent episode of SmackDown to cover. One of which I am absolutely dreading and looking to put off as much as humanly possible. Hint, it wasn't the Retro show. God, think about how bad that is. The fact that I'm looking more forward to talking about an episode of WWF Raw circa 1994 than a 2023 episode of SmackDown, knowing how rotten WWF programming was in the mid-90s. How far have we sunk? Pretty dang low, if you ask me. But, in all fairness, this was a pretty eventful episode of Raw, historically speaking. Not only did we have a major title switch occur on this show, asterisk on the title switch, but this is technically the 1-year anniversary episode of Monday Night Raw. And just to think, here we are in 2023 celebrating what I guess would now be the 30th year anniversary of the pilot episode of Raw. 30 years. Man, if I only had the tenacity. I'll tell you something. If anyone would like to take on the task of devoting an entire wrestling channel to reviewing every single episode of Monday Night Raw, dating all the way back to 1993 and then working through the Peacock library up through 2023, that individual deserves my utmost respect. I cannot promise you right here, right now, that these Retro Raw reviews will continue through that point. I don't think I have enough lifespan left to review that much Raw content, much less hours in the day. Maybe if they paid me. And even so, I still might have a heart attack before we'd even get to the 2000s. Because that means I'd have to get through the Russo era of the Monday Night Wars. And that right there, that's enough to kill a man. You tallied up on the subject of worst ways to potentially torture a human being. What do we got? There's lashing, there's waterboarding, there's the gas chamber, and then there's reliving the entire Russo regime of the late 90s. They all equally suck. It's just which one is the lesser of all the evils. Well, in any case, you can all contemplate that while I run through this 1-year anniversary of Monday Night Raw. This would be the January 10th episode. And we'll get to the main story of the show in a minute. But first, with it being the 1-year birth date of Monday Night Raw, what better way to kick the show off than by bringing out the Macho Man Randy Savage for some pomp and circumcision? Sorry, old undergrad joke in music school. But Savage has been officially reinstated to Raw after having been suspended due to his altercations with Crush. And albeit, while the guest color commentators have been fun over the last month or so, nobody can take the place of Randy Savage as Vince's partner in crime. The only thing still missing from the equation is Bobby the Brain, but we've already covered that sad state of affairs, unfortunately. By this point, actually, I believe he already would have debuted for WCW, because the turnover from his departure from the WWF to his debut in WCW was pretty fast, actually. In any case, we kicked off with our opening bout for the card, a tag team championship match with the Quebecers defending against Marty Jannetty and the 1-2-3 Kid. A match they set up last week when Johnny Polo was on commentary and the babyfaces came out and basically goaded Polo into having his boys put the titles up here. Even though they were already scheduled to defend against Owen and Brett in a few weeks at the '94 Royal Rumble. We'll get into it. Don't you worry. This was a very messy situation all in all. Now, of course, the story going into this was that Pierre and Jacques weren't really sweating Jannetty and Kid as suitable competition. They were talking about how this would be a warm-up match for them, and boy, how that backfired in the end. Now, when they set this up last week, I talked about how I remember this match for them doing the surprise title switch at the end, but that I also remember them somehow getting the belts back on the Quebecers before the Rumble pay-per-view. I was a little shaky on how the heels ended up with the titles again. Turns out by the end of the show, it really wasn't all that eventful because they just set up a rematch for next week's show. However, I talked about how this was a very famous Raw moment, most notably because of the title change, but also with the way they basically booked everything from start to finish here. Because, it starts with the faces pretty much dominating the heels as soon as they go through their first commercial break. You got Jannetty and Kid literally outmaneuvering the Quebecers at every turn. The heels just can't gain any leverage or control no matter what they do. Meanwhile, you got Johnny Polo in his ridiculous getup on the floor trying to gain control and talk strategy to his boys. All for naught because they still end up getting their asses handed to them. And at the point they cut to their first commercial, they come back, and Vince is talking about how we almost had a title switch during the break. However, they had to reverse the decision because when Jannetty went to cover one of the heels, he ended up getting his foot under the bottom rope, and the ref didn't see this, so he accidentally counted the original pinfall, and while everyone was throwing babies in the air and acting like it was the end of fucking Game 7 in the World Series, the heels and another ref came into the ring to smarten up the official to the fact that the Quebecers had their feet under the bottom rope, and basically that they had an outing. So they show the replay of all that. They continue the match into basically the second half. And at this point, if you're a smart fan, you would try to apply logic to the scenario and think, well, okay, they already did the fake out with putting the babyfaces over with the visual pin. So, that's kind of a paint-by-numbers booking move. They redo the match. This time the Quebecers are going to find a way to steal the belts and scurry out of there. Oh, but there was more. So we come back from break, and this time it's the heels that finally are able to take control of the match. Cheating, of course, but after literally being bumping machines for like the first 8 minutes, not being able to literally get in any lick of offense, when they ring the bell for the start of the second half, the heels are finally able to cut off and neutralize the faces. Waltman was trying to do a bunch of high-risk stuff to the heels, but right as he went up top to try a big dive onto Jacques, Pierre snuck in the back door and shoved the kid off the top turnbuckle. So they go into their second break while the selling in the heat portion of the match is going on. Jannetty at this point is on the floor sleeping. Waltman's just getting decimated in there. During this, I wrote down that Jacques gave the 1-2-3 kid one of the best stuffed pile drivers I think I've ever seen. One of those instances where you look back, even in 1994, and you think, man, I really wish the pile driver was still an actual finish instead of a transitional move. You know, especially when you had guys that could actually do a believable looking pile driver. Makes it that much more disappointing to see how neuter that move's become over the years. In any case, they follow that immediately with the Quebecers doing the double-assisted move from the top rope where Jacques basically flips Pierre over his head and Pierre does the senton/leg drop onto the guy who's laying in the middle of the ring. In this instance, he came directly down on top of Waltman's ribs. Looked like a miserable fucking time. And from there, Jannetty got involved a little bit to try to even the playing field. They ended up milking the big hot tag so he could get in there and start making the comeback. And within probably the next minute of Jannetty getting in there to run wild, he immediately went over to tag Waltman back into the ring so they could both hit a double-assisted brainbuster combo to win the belts clean. And of course, everybody creams themselves because they did not get swerved. They not only gave Marty Jannetty and Sean Waltman the visual pin during the first commercial break, but then they turned around about 10 minutes later and put them over again, this time with them actually winning the titles. No BS, no excuses, just clean victory. You know, of course, there's that classic moment where they're out there in the crowd holding up the belts. The Quebecers are on the floor dumbfounded by all that went down. And, I mean, again, even though the title reign was short-lived and they end up losing the belts back to them like a week later, you can definitely see that the goal was to create a memorable one-year anniversary moment. Yeah, they essentially hot-shotted a title switch on television to do it, and normally people would probably say that's ill-advised. But, you know, then you factor in that it's the WWF tag titles, which, let's be honest, were never really belts that Vince took all that seriously anyway. You know, it wasn't like the Intercontinental or even the World title. It's kind of a known fact that Vince McMahon wasn't the biggest advocate of tag team wrestling. You know, sure, at least by this period, the tag team scene was still a little more prominent, but again, it was not at the top of the pecking order in terms of prestige and championships. So it worked. You know, it created a cool moment. The babyfaces went over strong, got a huge pop in Richmond, or wherever they were this week, somewhere in Virginia, I think. You know, they actually had a cool little vignette directly after this where they showed the 1-2-3 kid getting that upset win over Razor Ramon from Raw the previous May. That infamous TV match where he pinned Razor in a 69 position. And that right there was the moment when you realized those two are going to be really good friends. Anytime you're comfortable enough 69ing your partner on live broadcast TV, I think it's safe to say that friendship is pretty tight. So yeah, that was a fantastic opener. Equally as fantastic too, Jim Ross doing the 1994 Royal Rumble card update. God only knows it took him long enough, but someone finally woke up one day and said, let's get Todd Pettingill out of there and replace him with somebody competent, less Caucasian. JR definitely fit that bill. He definitely had a less punchable face. And surprise, surprise, I know this will sound remotely shocking, but Jim Ross was actually a lot better than Todd Pettingill. About 10 times more professional sounding. I know, write that one down. No, but seriously, Jim was so great here. And literally, the best part, he did not say or run down anything that Todd had not already mentioned in the last several Rumble card updates. But my God, was JR's delivery a million times better. And as much as people have been complaining about JR's role in AEW over the last year or so, the fact that he's obviously been phoning it in and really didn't seem to have a whole lot of passion for what he was doing, probably why they finally removed him from the Dynamite shows, because it was just very evident that he just fucking hated calling that show. And I don't blame him by and large, because if I were in the business for as long as JR has been and had that much experience calling wrestling over the years, especially back during a time when the business wasn't completely rotten and putrid, if I had to go out there and call 99% of the bullshit that happens on Dynamite every week, yeah, I'd be pretty goddamn miserable too. But man, you even look back and see him running down the 1994 Royal Rumble card. 2 minutes of television this got. And this guy's passion level is through the roof. He looks perky. He looks genuinely happy to be there, like he enjoys his job. Looks like he believes in everything he's saying. Even if deep down he probably looked at a lot of that talent pool on the card and said, what the fuck is this? He could at least sell you on the idea that he cared. Yeah, and obviously his health was a lot better around this time, so that had a lot to do with it. But man, classic Jim Ross tapes. Whether it's Mid-South Wrestling, WCW in the 90s, or even the WWF in the mid to late 90s. What a cat. One of my all-time favorite play-by-play guys in the history of that business. You truly can't go wrong with the OGs. So, up next we had a Ludwig Borga squash. But before that, they replayed the Jerry Lawler Tiny Tim King's Court segment from July of 93. A segment that, well, on the one hand, was definitely a memory. Not one that I particularly wanted to recall, but hey, WWF had Tiny Tim on Monday Night Raw in 1993. They've done worse with the celebrity picks before. That's all I can say about that. Who could ever forget Tim's hideously bad acting? It's, it was not as comically hideous as Dominic Mysterio, but I'd probably give it a solid -2.25 stars on the quality acting scale. I think it's a fair assessment. So anyway, Borga wrestled Brad Anderson. If you picture in your mind the idea of what Ludwig Borga versus Brad Anderson looks like on paper, it's pretty much the match you got in execution. At best, I could say it was boring. At worst, I would say it was enough to make the devil's eyes bleed. I don't think I've seen job guy rope running as ugly as Brad Anderson in my entire life. He literally looked like he didn't even get through stage 1 of training school. The most basic thing a guy can do in the ring, and he couldn't even get that right. But Borga beat him with a modified rack, which promptly led them to kind of tease us with the whole Lex Luger thing. Because they had him on the line where he was talking about Borga and talking about the Rumble, and then I quickly realized, oh my God, we still have a Lex Luger-Ludwig Borga feud to look forward to. Well, remember what I said last week. 1994 was a rough time for the WWF. One may say it was a dark time for the WWF. Much like the next segment, which was both dark and comical at the same time. They re-aired footage of a segment from WWF Superstars where The Undertaker spoofed Yokozuna with more of his casket development ahead of the Royal Rumble match. Paul Bearer informed the heels that it was a form of gross mismanagement to not read the fine print of Bear's contract stipulations, and now Yokozuna must pay the price in full. But hey, on a positive note, it looks like The Undertaker's finally done building the double-wide casket. Only took him about 4 weeks to do so, but it appears that his time and energy paid off in the end. And Taker informs us that Yokozuna has made a huge mistake, and Taker doesn't make mistakes. He buries them. By the way, here's an interesting little tidbit of information. If you actually go back and rewatch some of these pre-tapes with Taker and Percy, you'll occasionally hear them drop the line about how the casket match was supposed to be a one-time only match. And it's funny because everyone pretty much universally agrees how infamously bad the initial casket match was between these two. Most notably the afterbirth stuff, which was just fucking disgusting in every sense of the word. But how in the blue hell they took one look at that first match, the train wreck that it was, and then decided, we need to do more of these kinds of matches. I have no idea how that passed the sniff test. I mean, the Attitude Era was full of strange surprises, but recreating the casket match, that took some balls. So, well, we kind of talked about the Brain from earlier, but he actually got a special cameo appearance on this show. Another classic Raw moment from September of last year. The Doink the Clown angle, where he threw the bucket of water on Heenan at ringside. Yeah. That was apparently a memory worth reliving. I mean, it was memorable. It was one of those instances of something that only Bobby Heenan was capable of making work. Nobody else could have pulled that off. So then we had The Undertaker versus Ray Hudson. Squash match, obviously. Which I know, it's shocking to hear. You're telling me Ray Hudson was just a generic job guy for the WWF in 1994? Yes. And the best part of this wasn't even anything that happened in the match. It was the angle at the start where Earl Hebner was carrying around The Undertaker's urn. And I actually think that this was a shoot because it was too perfect with the way this all turned out. But Taker ends up stalking Hebner, and I legitimately do not think that Hebner knew that Undertaker was right behind him, because he turns around and sees this giant 7-foot dead guy right behind him, and at the point he realizes that the urn is still in his hands, he then tosses it to Bear like a basketball and then hightails it the fuck out of the ring. So either that was the most well-executed pre-match angle of all time, or The Undertaker did a shoot spoof angle with Earl Hebner in 1994. Kind of betting on the latter. All of this was more exciting / noteworthy than the actual match. There was also the moment in the match where Vince McMahon was expanding on the possibility of having John Madden join the World Wrestling Federation in 1994. Which I don't know if a lot of people actually remember a whole lot about that story, but that was a thing that was going to happen, apparently. Where Vince wanted to bring in Madden as... I don't even know if you could say he wanted him to be a guest host for WrestleMania 10, but I mean, he definitely wanted John Madden as part of the celebrity wing for the WrestleMania 10 event. Never facilitated. But boy, can you imagine how big a deal that would have been? They would have brought in John fucking Madden in 1994 for a WrestleMania appearance. My God. The potential gate they could have done for that would have been insane. I wonder what happened to where they couldn't make that work. And I don't even like football. I'm just thinking about the crossover appeal between the NFL and the WWF fans from back in the day. Because we all know how much Vince loved him some football. Loved it so much he tried to run his own league. And both times it plunged into the depths of hell. I totally forgot about that, though. That was almost a thing that happened in 1994. John Madden almost came to the WWF. What could have been? So, oh, by the way, Taker won that match. Just in case you needed that documented for history's sake. It is very important to know that on January 10th, 1994, The Undertaker pinned Ray Hudson with a tombstone piledriver. Very important detail. Speaking of details and things that we all need to document as evidence, here was Monday Night Raw's main event for January 10th, 1994. Not making this shit up, by the way. Bastion Booger versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Wherein the setup to this is a direct quote from the events of last week's match. Luna Vachon was, quote, rubbing Booger's hump. She was, in fact, rubbing Booger's hump. That line right there, that is pretty much the epitome of WWF in 94. I don't think anything else needs to be said. We've about covered it all now. Anything else that transpires in the next 12 months is futile by comparison. I heard Vince McMahon actually utter the words, Luna Vachon rubbed Booger's hump. And at that point, I completely gave up on life. I just stopped everything I was doing to contemplate what the fuck I've been doing with my life for the better part of 25 plus years. I went into the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face, have a decent conversation with myself. I could take no more. I gave up. I just said, you know what? There's only 7 minutes left in the show. I could go to bed that night not having watched Bam Bam Bigelow versus Bastion Booger and wake up the next morning not having felt bad about it. So, yeah, you can all let that sink in. Luna Vachon rubbed Booger's hump. That is what prompted this match. That and Bastion Booger attempting to sexually harass Luna at ringside last week, too. But this was apparently what they decided would be a suitable main event TV match. Not the WWF tag title match, which was only about 100 gazillion times better than this abomination. No, Bastion Booger versus Bam Bam Bigelow for Luna Vachon's admiration was apparently a more fitting main event. Fail. But at least they didn't close with that segment. We had one more little pre-tape here with the Quebecers. Having just lost their WWF tag titles in the opener, now they are somewhere in the back area completely dejected and beside themselves. Johnny Polo was doing a pretty good Raven impression before Raven was even a thing. Looking all mopey and bum-faced. and I have no idea why I started laughing at this, but as soon as Polo started going off about what happened, keep in mind, these guys literally just lost their tag titles in the opening match of the show. And what are Polo's first words to come out of his mouth? And I quote, "Ah, man, this stinks." Stinks. Not, "Motherfucker, this is an abomination," or "God damn it, what a BS call." No, the only thing that Johnny Polo could come up with is, "Ah, shucks, this stinks. I can't believe we got beat by a bunch of losers." Like he's a first grader that just lost the round for his team in dodgeball at gym class. I laughed so hard at that. That's WWF comedy at its finest right there. I'm just like trying to envision myself in a scenario where like a UFC fighter would do a post-match interview where he just got his ass kicked in the octagon and he's doing the press conference. People are asking him what happened and he goes, "Ah, man, this stinks." Just picture in your mind Conor McGregor saying that. People have been waiting in the parking lot to beat him with baseball bats. I also laughed at the fact that apparently, unbeknownst to the genius that is Johnny Polo, apparently the Quebecers had a clause in their contract for a title rematch by the off chance that the babyfaces fluked their way into a title win. So they promised that next week in Madison Square Garden, they're going to get their belts back, and then they're going to go to the Royal Rumble to face Owen and Brett for the titles, like what was initially planned. And of course, Polo is selling this like he had no idea that they had a rematch clause in the contract. So he's nodding and playing it up like he was keen on what was going on. And then at the end, he made a great heel stank face right into the camera. And at that point, I officially deemed Johnny Polo my all-time favorite wrestler. I was overcome with joy at watching him be the best pea-brained heel manager of all time. It makes me incredibly sad to know that people only really remember Scott Levi for the Raven character in ECW, later obviously the WWF, and the fact that we all completely discount how great he was as Johnny Polo. What a fucking legendary character that was. Truly underrated. But, well, there you have it, I guess. Next week's main event is officially set in stone, and I presume that's where the title switch happens again. Not to play spoiler or anything, but I mean, it's really the only likely possibility at this point. That was a fun way to close out this official 1-year anniversary of Raw. And you know, again, we talk about how bad the product was around this point for the most part. This is a pretty enjoyable show. Obviously, the tag title stuff is the main takeaway. You know, everyone was great in their roles for that segment, and, you know, while the rest of the stuff on the show wasn't as noteworthy, we did get an all-time classic moment out of this one. You know, plus we got the Macho Man back, and who doesn't love the Macho Man? I almost love him as much as I love the Bloodline on SmackDown. Although I think I'll always have a soft spot for anything involving Sammy, Roman, and the rest of the Bloodline. Speaking of the Devils, they kicked things off this week with a little bit of pandemonium. Side note, let's play our drinking game. Bloodline starting off Friday Night SmackDown. Take a shot. If it ain't the Brawling Brutes, Bloodline's usually a safe second bet. However, I will not totally poon the uncreative approach of starting with the same cast of characters yet again, even though I could. Because at least here, they had a valid excuse to come out and start throwing shit around. After all, Sami and Roman literally just lost a tag match on last week's show to a makeshift tag team where one of the guys hadn't wrestled a match in well over a year. I'd be pretty fucking pissed if I were them. Now, of course, they're supposed to be heels, so naturally, the Memphis crowd starts immediately giving them Usi babyface chants, because this is 2023 where faces and heels exist in hypotheticals only. So, they go through all their usual opening soliloquies. Roman's doing the acknowledge me shtick, but pretty quickly he turns it over to give Sami the spotlight, and he starts talking about how they sent a message to everybody on this past episode of Raw. And of course, I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about because I don't watch Raw. But apparently they beat some people up or something. Cool. Maybe showing a replay would have been helpful. But then Roman did the best condescending promo of the century, talking about last week's tag match with Owens and Cena and how people have been raking the bloodline over the coals because they lost. And of course, Roman pocketing from the playbook of all the longtime veterans of the business, saying that he didn't lose last week because the tribal chief doesn't lose. That doesn't work for him, brother. Doing jobs isn't in Roman's DNA. Sami was the one that lost. And he directly points at Sami like a fucking dick. And meanwhile, Sami is standing there going, well, he's kind of got a point. Just laughing it off. And meanwhile, I am howling at the idea that Sami recognizes that he got pinned in a match last week, and he's not even going to try to dispute it. He's like, yeah, that happened. That was a thing. But of course, Roman's not concerned about that. What he's concerned about is not living up to his promises. And last week, he guaranteed a victory. And the tribal chief never fails on his guarantees. So he's trying to mull over in his mind what the hell went wrong last week. And of course, he's holding back fumes here, asking Sami if he thinks that he can live in Roman's shoes as the leader of the bloodline. And right at the point he snaps on Sami and starts yelling at him, out comes Kevin Owens to try and assuage the situation. He basically tells Roman that he's been saying for weeks now that he's had a Kevin Owens problem, and here he is right now expelling all of his frustrations on Sami instead of keeping his attention on the guy that's been a thorn in his side for well over a year now. So he challenges Roman to a title match at the Royal Rumble to settle the issue. Roman kind of passes it off as, whatever, fuck you, you're not even worthy to be breathing the same air as me right now. And, that was kind of a flat-footed way to set up a title match for the Rumble show, but, whatever. It's not like people are actually buying that Roman's losing that match. I did like his go-home line where he told Roman that he'll see him at the pay-per-view, and as for Sami, he'll see him whenever he decides to dig out his balls from Roman's pocket. That was pretty much the opening deal. Not the greatest opening segment in the world, but Roman was pretty phenomenal here. Kind of seemed like he was starting to lose the crowd at one point when he was milking up the blow-up to Sami. I like what they were going for, but it did seem like he was talking in circles for a little bit. It is fascinating, though, how KO interrupted all this right when it looked like Roman was about to eat Sami's lunch. So, again, they're doing a great job of teasing the idea that Sami and Owens might still actually have something going on behind the scenes. They've already kind of alluded to the idea that Sami still has a relationship with Kevin, even though he tried to dismiss it previously. And we all know those two have been attached to the hip for years. So it's one of those stories where you don't really know what side of the fence it'll fall on. it is entirely possible that Sami and Owens reunite at some point, and it would make total sense. I don't know if we really need to see that, but I mean, I can at least buy the idea that it's probable. So this is fine. I can't really say that I'm stoked about the idea of a Roman Reigns Kevin Owens title match, mostly because I've kind of been lukewarm on Kevin Owens in WWE for a long time. But I mean, as a placeholder program before WrestleMania, I can deal with it. What I cannot deal with, however, was what happened next. Kofi Kingston versus Santos Escobar. Again, I initiate the hashtag New Day rule. Once that theme music hits, I immediately hit the fast forward button. Can't do it. The fucking pancakes, the trombones, the rainbow unicorns, the fucking ridiculous antics and dancing. Immediate turn the channel heat. So I skipped right to the end of that segment. I don't know if they had any kind of special stipulations for that match or not. With Kofi involved, it is Rumble season, so maybe this was a qualifying match or something. In which case, I presume that Kofi won, because it seems to be the only thing he's useful for in WWE these days. Creating Royal Rumble match elimination moments that have been recycled to death, to the point where not only have they run out of ideas completely, but now we're all just waiting to see whether or not Kofi would fuck up his spot. Wasn't that what happened last year when they had something planned for him and it went totally awry? Poor Kofi, man. Sucks to be him. It also sucks to be Sami Zayn on this night. Man, was that guy in the doghouse. Even the Usos are disappointed in the Bloodline's honorary use member. But hey, on the one hand, Paul Heyman still loves him. Fucking snooty prick. I love Paul Heyman so much. He's the best. I can't say any more. So at that point, they reminded me of some not so great news. I had completely neglected the fact that every year they have a Women's Royal Rumble match, wherein every year when I watch the Rumble event, I now have to endure a slow, torturous, grueling, and excruciating hour plus of watching a bunch of sloppy female wrestlers try to throw one another over the top rope. They've been trying this concept for, God, I don't even know, close to 4 or 5 years now. Every year, it fucking sucks a cock. But boy howdy, this is the land of equal opportunity, so even though we've clearly established that this concept dies a horrible death every year they do it, they're just going to keep at it until someone actually dies, apparently. And all signs are pointing up when they announce that of all the girls that are apparently going to be a part of this thing, Liv Morgan will be one of the featured candidates. It's like a bad kidney stone. Just know that it will pass. The pain will be long. It's going to suck. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We can make it. Kind of like how the same holds true for whatever horrors await us at the Pitch Black match between Bray Wyatt and LA Knight. A match that sounds so horrific on paper, even Kayla Braxton could not interview LA Knight about it with a straight face. Even mentioning the idea of this gimmick match was enough to make her probably throw up in her mouth. God bless LA Knight, man. He's a hell of a promo. He's a fucking wizard on the stick. One of the best things going in WWE today. But I don't even think LA Knight is going to be enough to save that catastrophe. And that is not an insult. That is just a fact of life.
Let me talk to you.
Yeah. So what do we have next? The show sucked, by the way. I don't think I was leading you on well enough with my sarcasm with a lot of these segments. For example, the fact that Triple H went out of his way to bring back Karrion Kross after his untimely departure late last year. And instead of, I don't know, doing something constructive with him, like booking him in semi-main event programs or making him a special attraction type character, because I thought that was sort of the main appeal at one point of the guy. Instead, they decided that it would apparently be a better idea to job him out to Drew McIntyre and then stick him in a go-nowhere program with Riddick Moss and Emma. Because clearly that'll make Karrion Kross come off like a big star. Feuding him with the guy that served as Boring Corbin's flunky for all of last year. Also, speaking of bringing people back and not having any idea what to do with them, what the fuck was the point in bringing back Emma? Was there a game plan for her at all? Beyond just having her come back as a special surprise opponent for Ronda Rousey on television? Well, in any case, this was a highly uneventful mixed tag match. I was bored to tears watching this. Scarlett and Emma did some sloppy, not so great stuff. Moss and Kross were fine. Moss and Kross actually sounds like a comedy team straight out of WWF circa 1998. And while I was desperately trying to come up with something constructive to say about this segment, Kross decked Moss in the back with a forearm and then submitted him with the Kross jacket. And then afterwards, Scarlett and Kross put a Rey Mysterio mask on Moss for Christ knows what reason. At which point I asked, who the fuck is feuding with whom right now? Am I supposed to care about Kross feuding with Moss or Kross feuding with Rey? And in the same breath, what genius decided that it would be a good idea to put together two guys with similar sounding names? Sweating profusely just thinking about this. My stress levels are through the roof right now. Someone give me a drink. I'm losing it. After that, they showed Drew McIntyre and Sheamus at a bar in Memphis somewhere. Looked like Applebee's. I spent more time contemplating why the hell there was a random cameraman in a bar in Memphis filming Drew and Sheamus talking strategy ahead of a tag title match with the Usos later on. And at the end, they all managed to get the entire bar to do a banger chant, including all the elderly people. At which point, I then wrote down, this show can eat a dick. Then, because I wasn't already on the precipice of having a fucking seizure, who should then come out to ruin my life but Charlotte Flair? Because that's really what I needed in my life at that point. Why not? Why the heck not? I already gave up caring about the show anyway, so why not throw Charlotte in there at the top of the hour to kick me in the groin while I was down? Staying there in her purple robe with that god-awful toy belt around her waist, showing off her newest round of plastic surgery, which gets more putrid the more I see of her facial reconstruction. And of course, the first words out of her mouth were, "Did you miss your queen?" To which I wrote down, not in the fucking slightest. And she's out there doing the most droning, boring, monotone, scripted, overly rehearsed monologue you've ever heard. I wrote down, I cannot believe that one of the greatest, most charismatic promos in the history of the business produced this as the next generation to uphold the Flair name. A woman with less personality and charisma than a goddamn pack of sloths, standing out there putting me into a self-induced coma. Thankfully, out came Sonya Deville, of all people, to save whatever brain cells I had left stirring at the time. And she actually put Charlotte to shame on the microphone, saying the only reason she's a 14-time champion now is that she beat a half-dead Ronda Rousey last week. But if she wants to prove that she's a real champion, how about she step up to face a real fighter? To which I said, Sonya Deville instantly became my all-time favorite wrestler of all time for that one segment alone. Unfortunately, that meant they were going to have to serve her up to Charlotte in an impromptu title match, and that wasn't any fun. So they had the match. It was no good. Charlotte sucks. We've already established her mic work is bottom of the barrel atrocious, but my God! Seriously. How long has Charlotte been doing this? And she still can't even hit the ropes without looking like she has no idea what she's doing? She still can't do the Ric Flair chops to save her life. Everything she does looks like it's in slow motion. My God, she's horrible. And what the fuck was that cartwheel spot into the clothesline where it looked like she totally whiffed Sonya? Seriously, why do people like this chick so much? Because she's a second-generational wrestler of an actual legend? Who gives a fuck? You know who else was a second-generational wrestler of a legend? David Sammartino. Ain't no one writing books or bios on the legendary wrestling career of David Sammartino. Or, I'll do you one better. Sticking with the family tree. How about David Flair? Remember how awful David Flair was as a pro wrestler? People weren't ashamed to take him to the woodshed when he was stinking up the joint on Nitro circa the late 90s. He was awful. Now, Charlotte, to be fair, I'd say she was a little better than David was. Not by much. I'll debate anybody on the subject till they bury me in the grave. Charlotte Flair is absolutely rotten as a professional wrestler. Everything about her, from her promo work to her wrestling ability to her lack of anything resembling personality, it's all terrible. Plastic surgery included. I can't believe people actually think she's good at what she does. I don't get it. For the life of me, I've never been able to understand it. And I'll never understand it. They'll wind up putting her in the Hall of Fame class 60 years from now, and I'll be lying there dead 10 feet underground somewhere laughing my ass off. Still not understanding what the big hype with her is. So with that said, not too fond of that segment. But it's amazing. Because then they immediately turn around in the following segment with a Cody Rhodes video package. Obviously hyping up his big return. An actual second-generational talent. It's like the polar opposite of everything I just said about Charlotte. On the one hand, you've got the daughter of Ric Flair, who is one of the most overhyped, overrated female wrestlers of the last decade, just sucks at everything she does. And then you have the son of the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, who, even though he's flawed and may not be the greatest wrestler in the last decade, boy is he proven to have one of the best potential comeback stories in WWE. And really, I stand by everything I said in that discussion we had in the 2022 analysis podcast. When it comes to Cody, the comeback story to the WWE, The fact that he always felt like a total anomaly in AEW no matter what he was involved with. Now we're sitting here closing in on the Rumble season. It's pretty much expected that he'll at least be one of the entries in the Royal Rumble match. Possibly even number 30. It's a very fascinating discussion on what they should potentially do with him when he comes back. But, I can certainly tell you that I'm a lot more interested in Cody's WrestleMania plans right now than a lot of the other stuff that's going on. If it ain't Cody and Roman for the title in Mania, I don't really know what other alternatives they have right now. It's the most logical story and direction to go. It's a hell of a lot more interesting than Bray fucking Wyatt getting the title shot, which I heard was rumored to happen at some point. Oh my God. I guess they're just going to wait and see how horrible that blackout match is at the Rumble before they decide what decision they're going to make. But, yeah, man. Cody Rhodes video package. What was that, like a minute and a half of television? Best segment on the entire show. No question. The most real, authentic thing that I've seen in wrestling pretty much the entire week. And a close candidate for best segment of the show, although not for the reasons you're probably thinking. Okay, pause. I want you to all think about this for a minute. This is Triple H's regime, right? Allegedly. He's bringing back a lot of people. Some of his former NXT babes that were unceremoniously let go at one point. But you're trying to rationally think, who are the best possible wrestlers that I could pair together on television to create the best show I can? Some brain trust in the back, apparently for no other reason than to amuse themselves, decided this would be a good idea. Ricochet versus Top Dollar in a Royal Rumble qualifying match, no less. You have an entire roster at your disposal here. And of all the fucking guys to put in a Royal Rumble qualifying match, I believe the first actual Rumble qualifying match that we have seen on SmackDown, to my knowledge at least. Again, I think the Kofi Escobar match was too, but I didn't even watch it, so I can't really say I was paying close enough attention. But someone decided that Top Dollar should get an opportunity. Top Dollar. Because that guy's a proven commodity. He's just tearing down the house every time he's in a featured spot on SmackDown, right? Not botching and fucking up moves left and right and damn near breaking his neck doing dives that he has no business trying. We got to give that guy a chance. And what a rib on Ricochet, right? So I had to watch this. Top Dollar has been at the brunt of a lot of conversation lately, most notably the Botchamania-worthy moments. And whereas I usually skip the hit row segments because I already know what I'm getting, they're going to be appalling, but I needed to see how bad this was going to be. I am convinced that this was a Hunter rib. He booked this match himself just to give everybody their comic relief for the week. Hunter knows he sucks. We know he sucks. Anybody with half a functioning brain knows that Top Dollar is the drizzling shits. So the only reason I can think to book him in a match here is to strictly expose him for just how awful he is. There's no other explanation for this. Seriously, I'm not kidding you. That appears to be the story. Because even Wade Barrett and Michael Cole are drawing attention to the notable botches of Top Dollar. Michael Cole even outright used the term botch. You know, Wade Barrett's sitting there talking about how Top Dollar has been getting a lot of flack from fans, to which I said, you fucking think? They're actually playing up the fact that Top Dollar sucks as storyline. What the fuck am I watching? WCW 2000? What the hell? So I watched this with my testicles crossed. I wrote, this could possibly be the end of Ricochet's career as we know it. I legitimately think they went out of their way to try and kill this man. I have no other explanation. Stealing a quote from Jim Cornette, because I watch his podcast every week, and this is a very famous euphemism from Corny. Not strictly directed to Top Dollar, but it's a funny line. But it is also accurate when I say that Top Dollar legitimately looks like a baked potato with arms and legs. Everything he does looks like week one training in wrestling school. One of the most god-awful physiques in the business today. I don't even know how to describe the ring gear. I'm not even going to go into detail about that. And as soon as I was about to elaborate on how dreadful Top Dollar is on every conceivable level imaginable, well, Ricochet hit him with a shooting star press and beat him. Probably in what will amount to be Ricochet's worst WWE career match. Not through any fault of his own. Man. The one time I watch a Top Dollar match, and I don't even get a Botchamania level moment. Although there's probably something Botchamania worthy in pretty much any Top Dollar segment. Just the visual of him in the ring, period. Him missing punches or hitting the ropes like he has no idea what he's doing. Ugh. Sadly, it appears that Top Dollar will not be entering the 2023 Royal Rumble. How will I sleep at night? Well, there's always next year. Or who knows? I mean, they beat up Ricochet after the bell here, so maybe they did an injury angle. Who knows? Or maybe Top Dollar will beat somebody up backstage at the Rumble and steal their place in the card, because we've seen that happen before. Oh, man, they got to find a way to get Top Dollar in the Royal Rumble match. It's got to happen. Some way, shape, or form. In the meantime, I guess we can all get excited for this. Check out this never-before-seen groundbreaking match. A match that we never thought would see the light of day. And not only do we get to experience it live, but we get to see it next week. For the opportunity to redeem himself after having taken the fall in the biggest match of all time. On SmackDown, in 7 days, for the first time ever, Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens. I mean, I don't even know what to say. A match that groundbreaking should at least be held off till pay-per-view. I mean, that's something we never thought we would see. Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens? For free? And it happens next week? Huh. I'm shitting myself just thinking about it. Whew. That's WWE for you. Always finding new and innovative ways to present never-before-seen fresh material. I can't think of anything more fresh than that matchup. I can almost say the same for the Usos defending the tag titles against Drew McIntyre and Sheamus. Unfortunately, it's the Usos we're talking about, and I think the cat's already kind of out of the bag with them. It's not quite turn the channel heat like it is with the New Day for me, but I mean, even the idea of the Usos wrestling at this point just gives me gas. Kind of like that Hawk promo on the TBS Superstation where he was talking about how Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez give him gas. Well, the same can pretty much be said about the Usos wrestling in 2023. I guess the only positive I can say about it was thank God it was relatively short. Although having to hear Michael Cole try to refer to the Usos as the greatest tag team of all time made me want to punch a fucking hole through my wall. And it was every paint-by-numbers Uso match you've ever seen. I was more so entertained by them occasionally cutting to the back to film Roman, Sami, and Heyman's reactions. There's one point where Sami and Heyman are yucking it up while Sami's chomping on some popcorn. While he's trying to offer some to Roman, there's Roman just staring a hole through him like he's the biggest fucking tool in the world. And Sami's totally oblivious. That one 10-second skit there made this entire wretched program worth sitting through. Just to get to that one moment. And there was a cool spot at the end where Sheamus and Drew gave the Usos simultaneous white noise backbreakers off the middle rope. They didn't time the bump all that well together, but it was an interesting idea. As per usual with WWE matches, though, the fans only really start getting into it when the false finishes come into play. So they pretty much sat on their hands until the last few minutes. Drew got a near fall on Jimmy Uso off the Claymore kick, which got a good reaction. Then about a minute later, the Usos hit their 1D on Sheamus, which Drew broke up for another near fall. I think that was one of the first times the Usos hit the 1D and it didn't directly lead to the pin. Announcers never mentioned that, but as far as I know, I don't think I've ever seen that. But they end up doing the spot where Solo sucker punches Drew on the floor. Charles Robinson is essentially looking right at it, and of course he does nothing about it. But, they do that so Butch and Ridge can run out to attack Solo. And while that's going on, Sheamus does a big dive onto the Usos on the floor where he essentially comes down on his kneecaps. Talk about ways to blow out your ACL or your MCL. And wouldn't you know it? Big shocking upset here. But the finish is Jimmy stacking up Sheamus while Jay assists through the ropes, and the Usos steal the belts again. Whoever saw that coming? And all of it was worth it in the end to see Sami Zayn in the back spiking his popcorn on the ground while Roman and Heyman are desperately trying to keep a straight face. If this entire last segment was just them filming Roman and Sami reacting to the match, God, this would have been an all-timer. Unfortunately, we only got like a minute and a half of them, and the rest was spent on the actual match. But Sami and Roman made it tolerable with all their stuff in the back. Mainly Sami. It almost made this trudge worth it in the end, but holy shitballs. This show is fucking hideous. Take out any of the bloodline, this was the worst television program I think I've seen in wrestling in the last 10 years. And that includes anything I've seen on AEW in the last 3. I mean that. AEW has not produced programming as foul as this show was. Like I said, you remove anything involving the bloodline, this one ranks up there among some of the all-time worst wrestling shows in I don't even know how long. Decades. At least decades. Maybe even going back to the dying days of Nitro. Actually, I take it back. Impact had some pretty vile programming. Probably just as bad as this show was. But at least Impact Wrestling was comically hideous for most of its run. This is just like taking my balls and nailing them to a step stool in terms of sheer agony. Not a fun experience at all. And the worst part, no Dominic Mysterio crashing Ray's New Year's Eve party. The fuck, WWE? Is he still rotting in jail after last week? Come on. I mean, trespassing isn't even that big of a deal. You're telling me Dominic couldn't find his way to come over to Ray's home for a New Year's Eve celebration? Nobody bailed him out? Aren't most of these people making six-figure salaries anyway? Ridiculous. Well, maybe we can all hope there's an exclusive video on WWE's YouTube page at some point. But while I do my own research on that, we will wrap up the show and cross our fingers that Vince doesn't sell the WWE to a bunch of radical leftists. Judging how most major TV networks are run these days, I mean, we're basically swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. Unless Vince just decided to take the exclusive route and make the company private again. There's always that option. By that point, though, I think it'd just be easier to sell the company. But that's what you get with a publicly traded enterprise. Probably the single biggest mistake Vince ever made with WWE when we look back at history. He's made a lot of ballsy moves, some of which were probably more daring than others. But the single most damaging thing long-term to ever happen to that company, making the World Wrestling Entertainment a publicly traded entity. I mean, all it's done is neuter the entire concept of what professional wrestling was always supposed to be. But maybe somebody can write a book on that someday. Someone with more experience and more knowledge than me. But we'll get back to things on the Friday Report and talk about AEW's Dynamite show. We'll also continue along in our retro review series for Dallas TV and Crockett Promotions. And who knows, maybe we can have Tony Khan actually try and book a decent program for once. Been barking up that tree for well over 3 years, and I'm still waiting for that sports-based presentation. Oh well. We're all sold a bill of goods at some point in our lives, right? Anyhow, take care. Peace out.